Resuming debate, the honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good day, everyone. I'm once again honoured to have the opportunity in this place to speak to matters contained within Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, a new name. I say again because, as many will remember in the previous Parliament, we tackled these issues under a different bill, and it was called C-10, an Act to Amend the Broadcasting Act. This is a new bill and a new title, but Madam Speaker, we still have the same issues that exist with this bill. It was interesting because moments ago in committee, the Heritage Minister admitted that C-10 was flawed. He said 2.1 should never have been in there, 4.1. He mentioned those two that we fought on this side, on C-10, for weeks. But unfortunately, even with the flawed bill, it passed the House, but then they called the unnecessary election and the bill died. But this is the first time the Minister of Heritage has actually admitted it was a flawed bill, C-10. So here we go now with C-11, an update. We all know the update is necessary, Madam Speaker. It's been 30-plus years since we updated the Broadcasting Act. I was even a young broadcaster 30-plus years ago when this came out. And a good one. Okay? At that time, believe it or not, there was no internet, right? It was just radio and TV back then, a little bit of newspaper, right? But of course, the internet came, and the World Wide Web, as we know it today, has changed a lot. There were no internet companies, Madam Speaker, no online streaming services to compete with the healthy Canadian broadcasters. But when the predecessor of this bill was drafted in Parliament last session, we addressed 4 major areas of concern where the government legislation lacked the significant consideration. I mentioned a couple of those, 2.1 and 4.1, but we'll go on. Social media companies, we all know, such as Facebook and Google and their various properties, like YouTube, to pay their fair share. We agree. Second, creating that level playing field for digital platforms like Netflix, Spotify, conventional, to compete with the conventional Canadian broadcasters. Define Canadian content. This is the important one, I think, Madam Speaker, and it's the third one, because we need to define Canadian content production and media fund contributions by digital broadcasters. What is the formula? And finally, the power given to the CRTC, better known as the Canadian Radio Television Communications Commission, to attempt to regulate in such a broad manner. This is an organization, Madam Speaker, which struggles to enforce their own regulations now. If we can even look at today, Russia Today. Well, they really never did take it down. It was the big conglomerates that moved in and took Russia Today down, like Bell, like Rogers and Shaw. So it's interesting. I think we all agree the CRTC should have moved long before Russia Today was pulled down from Canadian programming. 40 years ago, Madam Speaker, internet companies and streamings were not even a consideration, but digital information has become absolutely accessible to everyone in this country. The demand for mainstream media, television and radio has nosedived. Streaming services become the primary source now of entertainment for many Canadians. Television stations have had to downsize their operations along with the radio stations. Many have gone dark in this country. The same is true for radio, and you know what? The radio stations right now, they have another issue. Their revenues have dropped as much as 40%. Part of the problem is the public broadcaster, CBC. This government gave them another $150 million more during the COVID to compete against private broadcasters. I just told you the private broadcasters' revenue has gone down 40%. CBC has gone up $150 million more in the budget. meaning you can see what's happening in the market. CBC, public broadcaster, is going up, while the private broadcasters, radio listeners, certainly going down, and thus the advertising isn't as good. So the result, like my province of Saskatchewan, we have seen a major decline in local content. Easy access to digital content has been beneficial to the consumer, but with the outdated Broadcasting Act, the broadcasting sector has had some steep hurdles to overcome, and I mentioned those just seconds ago. So is it fair to ask, what does a modernized act need to accomplish? And does the government's latest attempt, Bill C-11, actually achieve this goal? The first concern that we should all address is the notion that the internet needs to be regulated. We need clarity, defined parameters, clearly defined parameters, which aspects the internet will be regulated and to what extent. So will Bill C-11 create an environment where virtually all the content would be regulated, including independent content creators earning just a modest living from social media platforms such as YouTube? Bill C-11 is almost a copy, as I mentioned, of the previous Liberal offering, C-10, which was flawed and failed to address many of the concerns addressed by the experts during those hearings. When we speak of creating a level playing field, Madam Speaker, is it the context of giving Canadian content creators the protection they need to produce and compete without impeding their ability to succeed at home and globally? Regulation done properly will support the success of Canadian content producers and meet the objectives, I feel, of the Canadian heritage mandates to support artists and the cultural sector. The bill, though, leaves very little hope that this is what's going to be achieved. I remain very concerned about the CRTC being tasked with administrating the Act. I believe, and I've been in the business of television and radio for over 4 decades, I've seen it that the CRTC is already stretched to its limits with the broadcasting and certainly the telecom situation in this country. CRTC lacks the capacity to carry out the current mandate effectively. How can it be expected to take on the internet? CRTC struggles to cope with the 4,000 or 5,000 entities in the broadcasting sector. We're seeing it in the industry committee now, where Rogers wants to take over Shaw. It started last year. We still have no definitive action on the CRTC. Will they make a ruling soon on the takeover of $26 billion? Can they even predict the number of entities that they will be required to look after once the online streaming is added to their mandate? And how much money, Madam Speaker, there is the one, and how much talent will the CRTC need on board in order to keep up with this bill? In fact, do they even understand the scope of the undertaking yet? How many years will it take to understand the criteria and scope and accumulate the resources needed to carry this out? Now, during our last debate on C-10, I asked the CRTC chairman, Ian Scott, who, by the way, is stepping down in September, he's had 5 years, how is the CRTC ever going to pay for this? He gleefully told the committee he would be going directly to the Treasury Board. Well, Madam Speaker, you know what that means. The taxpayer will be paying more for their services. What is perhaps most disappointing is that the CRTC will be handed the power to develop the rules of regulating, and they can make those rules up as they go along. This act endows the CRTC with the ability to determine its own jurisdiction without constraints. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Guelph.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I was very interested to hear the Honourable Member across the way, especially given his background in broadcasting. What I was listening for in his speech that I didn't hear, and my question is on the support of our artists and creators, the people that bring the content to broadcasters, whether it's the radio or streaming services, and how there's a value gap, that they're just simply not paid for the value that they create, and how this act is put in place to address that, to bring support to our artists and creators. Could the honourable member comment on how this act can improve the lives of our artists and creators in Canada?
Honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the member from Guelph. He's so true. Many of our newfound talent actually came from YouTube, and then they progressed from there. Many don't deserve to be on YouTube, quite frankly, as their careers will never lift off, but it's a way to try to get started. This will be the discussion as we move forward on C-11, what to do with the internet, the YouTube, and so on, because many performers in this country are making a pretty good living right now with their talent on YouTube instead of the traditional media that we know today of radio and TV.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Drummond. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to commend my colleague from Saskatoon-Grasswood for his speech. He's a very honourable colleague with whom I sit on the Heritage Committee. Now, we don't always share the same viewpoint on things, but we certainly have the same passion. I'd like to ask him, he was part of the discussions on C-10 during the previous Parliament, and now we have this bill, which is quite similar to C-10. Does he think that committee discussions will go well, and does he intend to work constructively so that we can move forward and improve this bill so as to pass it? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the member from Drummond. He's a valuable member on the Canadian Heritage Committee. He has been there for years. We worship his input. We always have interesting conversations. I think for the member of the province of Quebec, one of the issues that we had in C-10 is protecting Quebec culture. And we did not see eye to eye on that a little bit because, you know, when you get to Netflix, they're not going to really shoot a show or a production in maybe Montreal because it has a limited segment of the population. They would rather do it in English because it has a larger audience. So, you know, we'll go forward, Madam Speaker, on C-11. It was interesting because, as he was just in the same committee I was, the changes that they've made to 2.1 and 4.1 from the old bill to the new bill, maybe it's time that this bill, in fact, will pass with those two new changes. We'll see.
The honourable member for Nunavut.
The Conservatives have made it clear that they are good friends with our American neighbors. The Conservatives have referenced the importance of Canadian content as well. I do want to ask the member if they agree that Canadian content, such as the medium is the message, is a value to be protected, or is it more than allowing American sensationalism, such as "Make America Great Again," over that? Thank you.
The honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
I'd like to thank the member from Nunavut. I was up there 4 years ago for a 2-week tour with the Senator Dennis Patterson. Enjoyed it immensely. The member would know APTN was formed in this country because voices were not heard. That's right, the public broadcaster, CBC, did not do a good enough job of giving the voices of Canadians. So what had to happen? APTN Television, out of Winnipeg, was formed. Why? To give the voices of Canadians. I would hope that in Nunavut, their voices are too heard correctly as we move along on C-11.